What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. All right, on that note, let's get to our mailbag. So our first question from my guy, NMZ Hoops, does really great work covering the league on Twitter. If you guys haven't followed him, I recommend you do. With 2/3 of the league qualifying for some form of postseason play, is it also time to abolish conferences for seeding? Some playoff series will be tougher logistically, but one could argue that 13 of the best 20 teams are out west, and as fans, we want to see more of the best teams compete. Yeah, I was looking at the standings earlier today, and as I was looking at it, it's crazy because there's legitimately 13 teams that are going to be trying to make the playoffs out west. And the one team that's kind of weird in there is San Antonio, but do I think San Antonio is going to be like a top 4 seed or anything? No, absolutely not. But I think they are going to be kind of in the mix and the play-in just simply because Victor Wembanyama is one of the most profoundly impactful young basketball players that we have in the league. And you finally gave him a really high-level ball handler in a role that's primarily going to serve to set Victor up. And when you combine that with probably an increase in his minutes and just the sheer frequency that he plays. And I shared a stat with you guys when we were talking about player rankings, and I don't have it off the top of my head, so I don't want to butcher it. But over the final portion of the season, I can't remember exactly the number of games, but it was crazy. They were getting their butts kicked with Wemby off the floor, and they were positive with Wemby on the floor over a pretty substantial sample size towards the tail end of the season, which just goes to show you what he's capable of overcoming. And he's going to be surrounded by even more talent in this particular season. Don't forget Harrison Barnes is just a really good veteran player that they've added to the mix. That's going to be a really, really interesting team. And so honestly, if you think about it, that's 13 teams, and 3 of them are just going to miss the playoffs entirely. 5 of them are going to miss the 8-team field. And that kind of sucks when we go over to the Eastern Conference, and in all likelihood, we're going to have multiple play-in teams that are just bad, and very likely a bad team that gets into the Final 8. And so I absolutely do think that it would be better for the league in the long run if they just got rid of the conferences and found some way to do. You could figure out a way with the schedule. You could reconfigure divisions and have it so that you play, 4 times each against these divisions, but then 3 times in your division, but then 3 times against everyone else, or whatever the specific workings of it would be. But if you did something like that, I'm not concerned about the travel, the increase in the quality of care that these players get in terms of private jets and the type of physical training that they get. I don't think the flights would be an issue. I think it'd be really fun to see more cross-conference matchups. I think it'd be great to have 3 or 4 Celtics-Lakers games a year instead of just 2, right? That sort of thing. I think that there's a lot of really good basketball that can be brought out of that. And then I think it'd just be better for seeding. It really sucked last year that when we went into the playoffs, it was 4 bloodbath series in the Western Conference, and then a bunch of dog shit in the first round in the Eastern Conference, as every team was, with the exception of that Cavs Magic series, it just was a lot of kind of funky matchups. So even the Indiana Milwaukee series, which would have been entertaining, was bad because of Giannis being out. But in that case, you had 2 really bad first round series out in the Eastern Conference, and that's not a good television product, right? And so I think it'd be better, and there'd be more parity if you had it set up with more of a balanced approach to the bracketing in the postseason. That said, I just don't think it's going to happen. I don't think the league is going to make that change. I think it's logistically pretty tough. Beyond even the travel, it's just a reorganization of the league that can be extremely complicated. And I would imagine people in the league office just think that over time, with the talent influx, that the Eastern Conference will balance out. The Western Conference will balance out. I would disagree with that just simply because, I saw this chart the other day on Instagram. It was kind of crazy. It was showing all the total number of good weather days around the United States. Some of you guys might have seen this on Instagram, but it was they were kind of a darker blue purple when they had lesser days that were good weather. And then it was the orange and red color when it was more days with good weather. And it was between 60 degrees and 85 degrees with within a certain range of humidity. And by the way, Tucson was one of the where I live here in Tucson was one of a few places outside of California that had 200 plus days of good weather. I've always been a big Tucson fan. I thought that was a cool moment. But California is where all the good weather is. It was crazy to see the map. It literally looked like a bunch of red and orange along the California coast, and then just a bunch of purple and blue everywhere else. Because it's either hot as shit here or cold as shit there. It rains all the time here, or, humid as hell there. Like, it's like all these people that play in the NBA, they start making money. I don't blame them for wanting to move to California. I don't blame them for wanting to get out to the West Coast where the weather's just better and a little bit more consistently good. And so I don't see a universe where like the Eastern Conference balances with the West. My entire lifetime, it's been like this. The entire time I've been following the NBA, it's been like this. The East will have phases where the top of the East is good, but it's never been able to balance out in terms of depth with the Western Conference. I don't think it's like necessarily a franchise competence thing. I think the talent just kind of naturally funnels its way to the better weather on the West Coast. So I don't think it'll ever actually happen, but I think it should, and I think it would be good for the league. How do you feel overall about Joe Mazzulla? I know you disliked him since you didn't think he valued the possession, but I'm curious if that changed after the title. He was in some ways the most important part of the run, and him being the first coach in a while to go for back-to-back. So learning about coaches takes time. It's been one of the more interesting things that I've come across as I've worked in this industry, simply because like what it takes to really learn about a coach, there's a beat writing element to it. Like these guys that are in the locker rooms, that are asking questions to the coach, that are going to shoot around, that are going to practice, that are deeply involved with the process, it's easier to pick up on that stuff. But like here in Tucson, as I'm just watching a lot of film, there are times when I try to watch post-game pressers, but like in terms of like the amount of film that I need to watch, a lot of times I just prioritize the games. And so I try to pick up what the coaches are doing from the way their teams play, right? And what got frustrating for me with Joe Mazzulla is I just hated the way the Celtics were playing for large portions of the last couple of years, and just the sheer number of bad possessions that they were putting together on offense. And it was during this postseason run in particular, not just this postseason, really in the springtime, I started to kind of like get more aware of it in like that late February, March timeframe. But as I started to listen to Joe talk more, and I tried to find more people that cover the Celtics on a really intimate level so that I can learn more from them, because they are the guys that are paying attention to every single little thing that their program does over the course of the year. It became clear to me that those were possessions that Joe Mazzulla didn't approve of. Joe Mazzulla does believe in the high volume of three-point shooting, but he believes in the deliberate process of offense. They're learning more about the way that they prioritize spacing and like little things. Like for instance, like if you have a guard in the corner and a big on the wing, then when I beat my man off the dribble from the opposite wing, I'm more likely to run into a guard in help rather than a big in help. Whereas if the big is in the corner and the guard is on the wing, I'm more likely to run into a big in help rather than the guard. And so even though I'm looking for drive and kick opportunities, if I'm a freaky athlete, if I'm Jalen Brown or Jason Tatum, and I can get downhill and I've got a 6'3" guard that's stepping over and help on the weak side, I might not even have to kick out for three. I might be able to go all the way to the rim and finish. That's a little basic spacing detail. Like take the time in your possessions to get guys in the right spots, to make it so that when you're running action, you're running it in a way that flows into your player's strengths versus your player's weaknesses. This guy's great from the corner, but weak above the break. Okay, well, let's make sure that he's consistently in the corner as opposed to above the break. Like this guy's really good on the short roll, this guy's not. Okay, then we want to make sure we're running screening actions with this guy in particular who's good at short rolling, catching the ball. These are like little deliberate things that Joe Mazzulla was preaching behind the scenes, and it just took a little while for the Celtics to like really figure it out, right? And honestly, like I think that there is something to be said about the large sample in the sense that like the way that you have to play basketball in a meticulous sense in the small sample is different than the large sample, but we just didn't have to run into that with Boston because they kicked the shit out of everybody. It didn't really end up being an issue where they were having to out-execute teams in the small sample. And so for Joe, and like part of that too is not even Joe's fault. Part of that's like Jason Tatum has never been particularly great at like the really slow, methodical half-court shot creation in crunch time situations, right? So like at the end of the day, that some of the struggles that Boston has had in those areas aren't necessarily Joe Mazzulla's fault. And they've been so good defensively in the clutch, and they're so damn hard to guard with their 5 out guys that their clutch numbers have been really damn good. And so like honestly, like whatever you want to criticize, a lot of people have, are putting Joe Mazzulla more in like that Budenholzer category, more of like a system type of coach. But like, I think over time he'll get even better at all of the little details, all the little things that he hasn't really had to show with the Celtics. And I think that it's a case of his philosophy working, because I told you guys, like, the Celtics were a team I used to hate watching. And I actually genuinely enjoyed watching them play in this postseason, because they did play with a lot of deliberate offensive process, and they were particular about getting their spacing right, and they got a lot of really good shots, and it made them really, really difficult to beat. Did they play any of the super, super good teams in the league that I wanted to see them play? No, but like, we'll get to see that this year, and it'll be just another challenge for these guys, and I'm curious to see how they react. But Joe Mazzulla was a coach that I became more fond of over the course of this season, and in general, the Celtics and the way they play is something that I've become more fond of over the course of this season. As the crisp air rolls in and the leaves begin to change, don't rely only on pumpkin to spice up your life. Embrace the natural power of cannabis this fall season with Via. Whether you're lounging by the fire or exploring new adventures, Via's premium federally legal cannabis products are your perfect companion. Farmed and crafted with care in the U.S. and trusted by over 500,000 customers, Via has a product for everyone. Via is well known for their premium THCA flower, grown indoors in state-of-the-art facilities and harvested at peak THCA levels to emphasize a natural aroma and flavor. Via is constantly adding new strains to its website every week, as they're always receiving fresh new strains from their independent farms' harvests. The THCA flower strains are grown with care and rigorously tested to ensure the highest quality, free from harsh pesticides or nasty chemicals. This month, Via is launching a high THCA flower in 7 grams and 28 grams and brand new flavors for the THCA vapes line, so you have more options than ever to blaze your own trail. Via is also well renowned for their award-winning THC and THC-free gummies and vapes, soothing topicals, and calming drops, all crafted with the highest quality hemp, sourced from trusted and independently owned American farms. And the best part, Via legally ships to all 50 states in discreet packaging directly to your door with a worry-free guarantee, no medical card required. My favorite part of the Via experience is the work they do on the packaging to help you understand what you're taking. You know how it gets with THC products and CBD products? Like, if you don't understand the strains, you don't know what to take when you're going to sit down and watch a movie versus when you're going out or to dinner or to go be in a social situation, right? And like, Via just does that work for you on their packaging with everything from their 0 milligram THC products all the way to their 100 milligram THC products. Like, take these CBD gummies, for instance. This one on the packaging, Zen, it's designed to help you with sleep, right? This one is called Flow State. It's designed to help you with focus. This one is called Revive. It's designed to provide relief, right? For people that don't have the time to research strains and all those kinds of things, this is something that does that legwork for you, so you know exactly what you want to take to get to whatever mood you are trying to reach. If you are 21 plus, check out the link to Via in our description, and please use the code HOOPS, that's HOOPS, to receive 15% off. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Prioritize your recovery and enhance your everyday with Via. Again, if you're 21 plus, check out the link to Via in our description and use the code HOOPS, that's HOOPS, to receive 15% off. After your purchase, they're going to ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Prioritize your recovery and enhance your everyday with Via. What are the 3 most important things the Chicago Bulls can/should do in order to pull themselves out of the hole they created? Love the show. Been a fan for years. Keep killing it, bro. Thanks for the support. I really appreciate it. It's interesting because I'm a big believer in the process of rebuilding, centering around finding the top tier talent, right? Like, step one is like, who's going to be your guy? Like, the guy that you build the entire system around, right? Especially on the offensive end of the floor. From there, it's like, well, what's that guy's strengths and weaknesses? Let's find a number 2 that complements him well. And then from there, we want to find role players that fit within the way that those players like to play. So if it's Luka, I'm looking for play finishers. If it's more of a 5-out kind of guy, I'm looking for guys that can dribble, shoot, and pass in a system, right? So like, it all depends on what your framework is. Now, the Caruso for Josh Giddey trade, there's always going to be part of me that wonders if you could have gotten a little bit more for Caruso. But at the same time, like, it doesn't make sense to hoard a really high-level role player when you don't have the actual top-end talent to make it work. And so that's actually an example of a deal what they're giving themselves an opportunity to see is like, okay, let's cash in this asset in Alex Caruso that doesn't really help us in the short term because he's a ceiling raiser among supreme talent, right? Like we know what he can do alongside the best players in the world because we saw it with LeBron and AD with the Lakers, where he can like almost reach you to another height because of all of those little things that he does, right? But that benefit just doesn't matter to the Bulls because they suck, right? And this was an extended period with the DeRozan, with that core with DeRozan and Vucevic and Zach LaVine, where they just weren't able to even keep their heads above water, let alone be even into some sort of deep playoff run where you could see what those guys are like in that setting. And so as you pivot, it's like, okay, well, let's see what Josh Giddey can do. And then from there, you start to give more high-volume ball handling responsibilities to guys like Kobe White, to guys like Josh Giddey, and you find out what they're capable of with the ball in their hands. Let's say you find out that Josh Giddey is actually like a legitimate offensive engine to start around. Well, it's like, okay, well, now we feel like Josh Giddey might actually be good enough, but we're going to give ourselves a number 2 that's more of like a role man because we know we need Josh Giddey on the ball. So like maybe it's more of like a player that's in like the Şengün kind of archetype, the Anthony Davis type of archetype, like a power forward center that is a guy that can complement Josh Giddey with these supreme gifts on both ends of the floor, but doesn't necessarily need to dominate the basketball where Giddey's standing in the corner where teams are going to put their center on him and not have to worry about guarding him, right? And so this is essentially a waiver. You're trying Giddey to just see how it looks, giving Kobe White more ball handling responsibility. Let's just see how it looks. And then from there, it's either going to make some sense or it might be one of those things where you end up flipping Giddey. You could revitalize Giddey's value. That's where this Caruso trade could end up working out in a big way. What if Giddey goes for 19, 10, and 9 over the first half of the season, and a team out there that like desperately needs ball handling ends up making some kind of move for him, and then you get draft compensation back, right? That is what could potentially open the door for you to potentially find that top end piece. But you're basically starting from scratch. There's no use in finding useful role players at this point because it doesn't fit your timeline. It's more important for you to cash in those guys for draft assets if you have them, like what you did with Caruso. From there, you're giving reps to guys that haven't had high volume ball handling reps, and you're just continuing to look for talent in the draft. It's like step 1 is admitting that you know that you have an issue, and it took a little too long. But for them to finally admit that the Vucevic, LaVine, and DeRozan core wasn't enough was a good step in the right direction. I don't know if they'll be able to find a LaVine trade partner, but eventually he'll be an expiring contract, and at that point he will be someone who carries some value, and so you can cash him in at that point. Again, it's far away, but at this point it's like making sure that you're taking in assets as much as possible by getting rid of anything that has any sort of value around the league, trusting in your scouting department to find talent, and you're seeking those foundational pieces, the guys that you can build the rest of the roster around. I've been meaning to ask you about your experience of the Golden State Cavs days, given that LeBron and Steph are your 1 and 2 favorite players, but you recently said that you hated Steph back then. Which moment/event made you fall in love or out of hate with Steph, and earlier with LeBron? So I've told everybody the story about LeBron. That's how I fell in love with the game of basketball. I was raised in a household that was very much baseball and football focused. My little brother played football at West Point. My older brother played junior college football and was a very good high school player. They were big baseball guys too. That was just what they did, right? And that's what my family did. And I just randomly got tall. Nobody in my family is over 6'1", and I'm 6'6". So like it just was kind of one of those things where I kind of was just naturally inclined to the game. But I randomly in 2006, and it was Game 7 too. It was Game 7 of the 2006 second round series between the Cavs and the Pistons. When the Pistons, it was Game 7, and Pistons beat the shit out of them. Like it wasn't even close. But that was actually my first like real time sitting down and watching NBA basketball and kind of falling in love with it. And so then I just started like following LeBron's career. And obviously you guys all remember what happened in 2007 when he took them all the way to the finals. And so just immediately fell in love with the game. And LeBron just became like my sentimental attachment to the game because he was the player that got me to fall in love with it. And so as you can imagine, a kid that never did anything with basketball as a kid to like picking it up as a teenager and then getting my school paid for it, and now it's what I do for a living. Like the game of basketball is so important to me, and so like LeBron is like always going to be like my emotional weak spot in terms of analysis in the sense that like I love other NBA players, but not the same way, just because LeBron will always have an attachment to like my childhood love for the game, right? If that makes sense. Now, as far as the hate thing with Steph, hate's the wrong word. Obviously, I hated having to compete against him, not individually, but as a fan, having to watch my favorite team compete against him. And he's so damn good. And as a roster, they were so damn good, especially when they added Kevin Durant. Like, it just was annoying, right? But it's, you know how it is, like, as time passes, you start to grow up and you start to, like, 2016, 2015, that would have been, I graduated high school in 2009, so I would have been like, 24, something like that. I was still kind of a kid, right? Like I was still handling it the way a 24-year-old would as a fan, you know? And so like as I got older and as I dove deeper into the game and as I started to coach and as I started to cover the league, it's like you grow to appreciate these guys in a different way, right? Especially now that we are not rooting for them to compete against each other as much anymore. And so at that point, like, there were several key things that really drove me to like Steph. One, his competitiveness. I've always been just like super annoyed with people that don't show the requisite amount of fight in sporting events. And what I've always loved about Steph is like, I never felt for a second like he wasn't giving everything he had in a big moment, just simply because the dude hated losing more than anything else. I had a conversation with Ethan Strauss on his podcast a few months ago, and we were talking about Steph, and he was pointing out like that Steph's favorite sport might be golf, and how like a lot of the all-time greats are guys that like are more competitive than they are lovers of the game, right? Like Michael Jordan's another example of that. LeBron famously loves football. Like I've found that to be very fascinating. But it was the first, the overall just sheer competitiveness, to the making the most out of his specific set of gifts. Like I was always super impressed by like the weight training regimen from Steph Curry. A lot of people don't realize this, but that was the main driver of his success. Famously, after 2015, he went to 2016 and he raised his scoring average by like 6 points a game and he had already won MVP and then got 6 points a game better. And he attributed most of it to lower body weightlifting. And the fact that it just made it so that he could get lift and separation better. And like, obviously we've seen what he's done with his upper body. We've seen what he's done to become a useful defender over the course of his prime. And that's just a lot of work. And it's a testament, because there's a lot of guys that have similar physical gifts that just didn't do that and didn't reach their potential. And Steph's going to go down as one of the 10 best players of all time, in my opinion, as the only guy in that list that's below 6'5", and certainly the only guy that doesn't have supreme athletic gifts. And so that was what drew me to Steph. And there are a lot of skill stuff too. Like I've always been really impressed by Steph's ability to quickly reset his base off the dribble. There are some footwork things that I've stolen from him, specifically like outside foot when you're moving laterally. Steph will like hit a dribble combination into a step back and cover a shit ton of ground, but then like go straight up and down at the end. But if you watch, like if he's going to the left, like he'll stick his left foot way out and he'll catch his body and reset his base to go straight up and down, which is a footwork element, but also a strength element. But there are elements of that I've tried to steal with the way that I play the game. And over time, I just found out pretty quickly that as I looked around at the other players around the league, like there wasn't anybody that was doing the kind of stuff that Steph was doing. And all of a sudden he became one of my favorite players. And I really, really, really enjoyed rooting for him over the tail end of his career. It's been a much better experience than rooting against him the way I did with LeBron with Steph when he was younger. What are the best ways for offensively limited rosters to squeeze the most juice out of their personnel? Teams like the Heat or the Wolves are clearly great defensively, but lack some offensive firepower to push them over the edge. So, it's interesting because there's the half court element and then there's the total game element, right? So like any team that has offensively limited personnel but has defensively minded personnel, there are ways to elevate your offensive performance on the margins. So for instance, getting out in transition as much as possible. Okay, so you're freaky athletic and good at defense. Well, don't play in the half court if you don't have to, right? Like that was the big thing with the 2020 Lakers. They were a little bit limited in the half court because they had a bunch of big, strong dudes and some of them couldn't shoot very well. But like they were just so damn good defensively and they were so damn good in transition that it just didn't matter. And then in the half court, LeBron and AD were able to make enough shots, right? Like with teams like Minnesota's a great example of this. Like they need to get stops and get out in transition. Like it was so funny to watch that Denver series. Like whenever they were getting stops and forcing turnovers and getting out in transition, they were killing Denver. But then every time the game slowed down into the half court, Denver was killing them. It was like a super interesting dynamic. So first is like exploit the margins as much as possible. That's not just transition. That's also like attacking the offensive glass. If you're bigger and more athletic, you can do damage on the offensive glass, right? There are different ways to squeeze those things out in the margins. In the half court, it's schematics. It's ball and player movement. If you have a player that's limited as a shooter, don't let him stand at the three-point line. Let him function more as a cutter and as a screener, right? If you have two non-shooters on the floor, you can actually run 5 out. This is one of the most common things that I see people get wrong in the YouTube comments. I see people be like, they do run 5 out. They could have this guy that can shoot at center. And it's like, running 5 out has nothing to do with how many players can shoot. 5 out is entirely about where players are while the action is being run. The simplest way to put it is like in 5 out, you never have a player just chilling in the dunker spot or like a big man that's just like permanently perched around the basket. In 5 out, your big guys are up around the elbows and they're working as dribble handoff fulcrums. Guys still go to the basket. They cut to the basket. They screen and roll to the basket. They drive to the basket, but they're not permanently occupying that space. There are lots of different ways, like 5 out offense manifests in a bunch of different ways, right? Like we see Golden State, it's like 2 non-shooters, a lot of guys coming off of screens looking to shoot, right? Boston, it's more individual 2-man game to try to get a defense in rotation. You'll see guys end up in the dunker spot. You'll see guards end up in the dunker spot just because as they're kind of going through the action, they'll briefly make themselves available. If it's there, they'll catch and finish. If not, they'll quickly get the fuck out of there, right? Like it's guys aren't just like perched around the basket. That's all 5 out is. 5 out is ball and player movement with your non-shooters functioning as fulcrums away from the baskets, cutting and rolling into the paint rather than standing in the paint. That's the main difference, right? But like within that, you can craft roles that make sense. It's just different from team to team, right? So like Golden State with their non-shooters and guys setting screens and guys flying off of screens shooting, they can't play the way Boston does because they can't get the dribble penetration, but Boston can't play the way Golden State does because they don't have guys like Steph and Clay, or used to be Clay, that could fly off of a screen and rise up and shoot a jump shot, right? Like Boston has a bunch of good catch and shoot guys, not a bunch of great movement shooters, right? So it's 2 different forms of 5 out offense that essentially center around the same concept of the paint being something that you temporarily occupy, you don't permanently occupy, right? But like with your team, so like with the Minnesota, for instance, right? Like they do their best to try to have Rudy Gobert screen and roll into space, and they try their best to have Jaden McDaniels occasionally come off of a dribble handoff, but there are just certain limitations in terms of ball handling and shooting from the non-Anthony Edwards, non-Mike Conley, non-Cat Karl Anthony Towns players, that they just have a certain ceiling in the half court. That's where you try to maximize it as much on the margins by getting out in transition, by attacking the offensive glass. But in the half court, it's just like, it's like Jared Vanderbilt with the Lakers. You don't have him stand in the corner. That's a waste of what Jared Vanderbilt is good and bad at. Like you're better off having him screen and roll into space. Jared Vanderbilt was a bad offensive player with the Lakers 2 years ago. He actually was pretty solid before he got hurt in January because he was functioning more as a screener and as a cutter. What is a successful season for San Antonio? Play in and smashed by Oklahoma City, Denver. Wemby establishing himself in the top 10. I'd say the big thing is getting big game experience. Like it's hard to learn about what a player is good and bad at until there's real high leverage situations. Physicality ramps up, scouting ramps up. It's easier for you to identify weaknesses. If let's say you get a play-in matchup and you squeak into the play-in, you play a first round series, but you get your butt kicked. You're going to learn a lot more about Devin Vassell and Victor Wembanyama and what their strengths and weaknesses are. From there, you can learn more about how to accentuate their strengths and how to fight against and limit their flaws. But you got to have high leverage moments for you to see that. I'm a big believer in like San Antonio is at the point where you need to find out whether or not Devin Vassell can be the go-to perimeter guy next to Victor Wembanyama. That's what you got to find out. If he is, then your entire focus shifts to finding high-quality two-way role players to fit their offense, right? But if Devin Vassell is not good enough, then your attention has to turn more towards, we got to find a number 2 for Victor Wembanyama, right? The only way to find that is to get into high-leverage moments and see what these guys look like when the shit hits the fan. With Vando and Christian Wood seeming to both be out of the start of the regular season, even though nothing official has come out yet with Vando, how effectively do you think the Lakers will stay afloat? They lost key players like Spencer and Taurean Prince and seem to be doomed defensively. I think they're going to be fine in the regular season. I don't think they're going to be a top 4 seed or anything like that, but I think they'll be in that 5 to 8 range most of the year. Again, they won 30 of their last 45 games. They were the 4th best record in the league after January 7th with this group of guys. That was with Vanderbilt hurt. That was with Christian Wood hurt. That was with Gabe Vincent barely playing until the very end of the year. Gabe Vincent being back and healthy will go a long way because that gives them a guard that can guard at the point of attack and kind of like level some things out in terms of distribution of resources. Like, it'd be great if Austin Reeves didn't have to guard the other team's best guard every single night, right? That said, like, even with all the flaws that we've talked about, LeBron and AD are still 2 of the top 10 players in the league, playing damn near at the top of their games at this point in time. Austin Reeves is still a baller. D'Angelo Russell, say what you want about him. He's a good regular season player. Rui Hachimura, I still don't know really what he is because he had an awesome playoff run 2 years ago and then an awful playoff run last year. But they're good enough to be a good regular season team. I think a lot of people are off the Lakers scent as a standings kind of team because they went 3-10 in December and it nuked their situation. But they were really good most of the year last year. And so as long as they continue to play like that, I expect them to be really good most of the year this year. Now, whether or not they can enter into that top tier of championship contenders, that is all going to come down to whatever big trade they end up making at some point this season. Do you think the Lakers would be better off if LeBron was more off the ball, averaging around 20 instead of his 25, letting D'Lo and Austin create, especially given that D'Lo grades out well in playmaking talent, but became a top-tier low man in the regular season? Stay blessed. I actually am the opposite with LeBron. LeBron, in my opinion, is still a devastating offensive player when he's devoting his resources there and his jump shots going in. Obviously, 2 years ago, he had that weird, bad jump shooting season. But last year's great jump shooter and was one of the best half-court shot creators in the league. So what I want to do is I want to alleviate LeBron's defensive job. If I can actually go to LeBron and be like, hey, dude, like, you can chill on defense for the most part. I just need you to create shots. That's actually, I think, the best way to use LeBron at this age. You want to use him for his brain at this point. I want the ball in his hands. I want him making decisions. It's specifically when he has to do most of the defensive work while Austin and D'Lo are off doing everything with the ball, where I can see some diminishing returns because LeBron still won't try on defense in the regular season. So, like, that's my main thing is the main thing I think the Lakers need to do is create an easier defensive job for LeBron in the regular season. Maybe that's a too big look. That's Christian Wood is somebody who would help with that. So hopefully he's not out for too long. Getting Jared Vanderbilt back would be a huge boost in that specific regard, but just making LeBron's defensive job easier is the best thing you can do for the regular season because LeBron still is one of the best offensive players in the league, in my opinion. What's Brandon Ingram's future in the league? What team makes sense to give him the best chance to fulfill his potential? Brandon's, in my opinion, one of the kind of underrated on-ball forwards in the league. He just kind of has to be on the ball. He's not a player that really functions well off the ball and ball and player movement. And so I think about teams that have really good defenses that would benefit from his pull-up jump shooting and some of his more surgical shot creation in the half court, but also kind of need talent. So two teams that I put up here were teams like Cleveland or Miami. Now with Cleveland, I think that also would come hand in hand with trading one of the guards, probably Darius Garland. But I think that would give them a little bit more firepower, and that would also kind of fit their system in a way that I think would struggle elsewhere. And then Miami, it's just you're at a point where you're a little bit desperate and you got to make a talent play. And I think Brandon Ingram would be an interesting fit there. But I don't know. I don't know where he's going to end up. This is going to be really interesting to see because I think his value is in the gutter right now, but he obviously was playing hurt or coming back from an injury last year. So I don't think that was necessarily the best way to evaluate him. So I think it'll start with him in New Orleans, hopefully revamping his value a little bit. And then from there, I think there'll be a team that's a little bit desperate looking for some talent that'll jump on him. Let's see here. We've got a healthy Kawhi at his peak versus Curry. Who would you take in a playoff situation and who would be easier to build a contender around? Curry, no question. Kawhi, for as good as he is not the type of guy that you can count on to consistently generate quality shots over a large sample. He's a better small sample guy because no one can stop him from getting to his spots, and he's one of the best individual shot makers that we have in the league when he's healthy. But if I get Curry, I know that just off the jump, I'm just going to get a bunch of really good shots all year long. I also know that with Curry, I can get away with playing a lot of defensive-minded personnel, as Golden State has done over the years. I don't think that one's particularly close. I would go with Curry. Who's your dark horse NBA champion contender based on the moves that were made this offseason? So we have a couple new top tier contenders, right? I think the Knicks, after they got Mikal Bridges, I think that puts them in the top tier. You just Brunson, Bridges, OG, Randall, Robinson. That's just a really damn good top 5 with a lot of size and athleticism and strength and shot making, and that's just a really good team. And then Oklahoma City getting Hartenstein, I think that puts them in their group. But there's a bunch of different teams that are in the mix there. Obviously, the obvious ones like Dallas and Minnesota are 2 teams that I think could be right back in the mix this year. Milwaukee, if those 2 guards that they brought in end up working out for them on the defensive end of the floor to kind of make things easier, and if Giannis and Dame have a better season. Obviously, the Philly, I don't think you can write out because of the Embiid factor. What if Embiid just has healthy knees all year, and then what if he just kicks everyone's ass in the postseason? And they also have Paul George and Tyrese Maxey, right? So that's one. And then the Lakers, if they landed a big trade, because LeBron and AD are still the 2 of the top 10 players in the league, and if you get them good two-way players around them, I think that's a devastating combo. Let's see. What's your favorite shot to make when you play basketball? Not your most efficient, but your most enjoyable shot to put in the basket. That's an interesting question. I would say the shot that I feel the best about when I make is probably a left shoulder fade, particularly from the right block when I'm facing over my right shoulder. The left shoulder fade is one of the toughest shots that I've ever worked on. The right shoulder fade as a right-handed shooter is easier because you don't have to square up in midair. But when you're turning over your left shoulder, you actually have to swing your right leg all the way around. And one of the things I learned from Kobe is you deliberately swing that leg around, and the momentum of your leg will naturally turn your body for you as you're turning. And it just alleviates some of the workload of actually getting squared up. But like when I pivot over my left shoulder and hit a fadeaway, it's such a great feeling because it's such a tough shot. And it's all about legs too. Like it's interesting. Like when I make it or miss it, it almost always comes down to, did I get enough lift? Like if I spin over that left shoulder and I get really good lift, to me, it just feels like a jump shot at the end. But like that's the fascinating part about that specific shot. It's just all lower body work to get you to where you can knock down a shot. It's definitely a satisfying feeling for me. Easily my most efficient go-to move, though, is that right shoulder fade. Like if I need a bucket in a pickup game and it's game point, I'm calling for the ball on the right block and I'm bumping with my right shoulder and trying to get to my right shoulder fade because that's a shot that I feel like I can make a good half the time in a big spot like that. Last question. The Warriors team closely resembles the 22 team. Would you be surprised if they made a run like 22? This is an interesting question because they do resemble the 22 team, specifically just swapping out role players for a couple of guys that are a little bit more of a better fit, right? Like getting a DeAnthony Melton, who I think is like, it's interesting. I've always looked at him as like, KCP is more of a movement shooter. DeAnthony Melton's more of an off-the-dribble shooter or off-the-dribble player. But both of them are like 2 guys that I consider to be rock-solid NBA starters. I think KCP at his peak was better, but I think DeAnthony Melton is really, really damn good. I think DeAnthony Melton is the kind of guy that's going to be a 2-guard, if he can stay healthy. He's going to be a 2-guard on a really damn good team one day. I mean, he's been on some good Philly teams, but what I specifically like about that is his ability to put the ball on the floor kind of makes a lot of sense within Golden State's offense coming off of screens. Kyle Anderson, in addition to being one of the most versatile defensive forwards in the league, is a guy that has a bunch of offensive limitations, but if you put him in dribble handoffs with Steph, I think he could actually be a pretty impactful offensive player. And we talked about earlier Golden State's offense and how they can usually work with 2 non-shooters as dribble handoff fulcrums. They did it with Looney and Draymond, right? They did it with Bogut and Draymond, right? Like we've seen that a bunch of times. They did it with JaVale McGee and Draymond sometimes, right? Like that dual fulcrum kind of concept. I think Kyle Anderson fits that really nicely. So in a lot of ways, it resembles the 22 team because they went from the 2021 team, which was clunky and weird, to a couple of role player tweaks, and all of a sudden it comes together. The main difference is that Steph isn't the same player. Steph was, in my opinion, the best or second best player in the league in 2021, 2022. And he just isn't at that level right now. So if Steph can get back to that top 5 player type of form, then I think we could be looking at a Warriors team that's one deal away from real championship contention. It's just a question of whether or not Steph can get it back to that point.